Have you ever pondered about the omnipotent power and supremacy of the Lord and how it was demonstrated in the face of the false deities of Egypt? Let's transport ourselves back to the time of the Book of Exodus. Here we find a record of 10 supernatural plagues, each a testament to the Lord's omnipotent power and supremacy over the Egyptian pantheon. Each plague served a purpose: to educate the Egyptians about who the Lord was, the only self-existent and eternal God. The plagues were not mere acts of divine wrath, but strategic maneuvers, each aimed at a different deity in the Egyptian pantheon. Moses, chosen by the Lord, served as the medium through which these plagues were performed. The ultimate objective: to liberate the nation of Israel from the shackles of Egyptian slavery, a mission that was indeed accomplished. Let's delve into the specifics of these plagues and the gods they were meant to challenge. The first plague turned the water of the Nile into blood, challenging Hapi, the god of annual flooding, and Osiris, who considered the Nile River as his bloodstream. This plague, recorded in Exodus 7, verses 14 to 25, was a powerful demonstration of the Lord's dominion over the forces of nature. It effectively silenced the gods of the Nile and caused the Egyptians to question their faith in their deities. Next came the plague of frogs, as described in Exodus 8, verses 1 to 15. This plague was a direct affront to Hapi and Heqet. Heqet, a goddess with the head of a frog, was associated with fertility. The frogs, which were once symbols of life and fertility, became a nuisance and a curse, showing the Egyptians that their gods were powerless against the Lord. The third plague brought lice, tiny, stinging, blood-sucking gnats. This plague is recorded in Exodus 8, verses 16 to 18, and it was a judgment against Seb, the earth god. The lice, emerging from the very dust of the earth that Seb was supposed to control, proved his impotence in the face of the Lord's authority. The fourth plague, as told in Exodus 8, verses 20 to 32, saw swarms of flies descend upon Egypt. This was a challenge to Hathor, the goddess of protection, and Vachi, the fly god. Their inability to protect Egypt from these swarms was a clear sign of their inferiority to the Lord. The fifth plague, recorded in Exodus 9, verses 1 to 7, caused the death of livestock. This was a direct challenge to Apis, the bull god. The death of the animals, which were often seen as incarnations of Apis, was a stark reminder of his powerlessness against the Lord. The sixth plague brought boils upon the bodies of the Egyptians. Found in Exodus 9, verses 8 to 12, this plague was a judgment against Sekhmet, the goddess of epidemics. The widespread affliction of boils made a mockery of Sekhmet's purported dominion over disease. The seventh plague, described in Exodus 9, verses 13 to 15, unleashed hail and fire. This was a challenge to Nut, the sky goddess, Seth, the god of storms, and Shu, god of the atmosphere. The destructive force of the hail and fire showed the Egyptians that their gods were powerless in the face of the Lord's wrath. The eighth plague, as recorded in Exodus 10, verses 1 to 20, brought locusts. This was a judgment against Siris, the god of crops, and Serapia, protector of crops. The locusts, which devoured everything in their path, were a clear sign of the Lord's dominion over the earth's produce, undermining the authority of Siris and Serapia. The ninth plague, described in Exodus 10, verses 21 to 29, brought darkness. This was a direct challenge to Ra, the sun god, who was the most worshipped god in Egypt. The darkness, which lasted for 3 days, was a powerful demonstration of the Lord's supremacy over the sun god. The final and most devastating plague was the death of the firstborn, as recorded in Exodus 11 and 12. This was a judgment against Heqet, the goddess of birth, and Min, the god of reproduction. The death of the firstborn showed the Egyptians that the Lord held power over life and death, a power that their gods could not match. Each of these plagues was a direct challenge to the gods of Egypt, demonstrating the Lord's power and supremacy. In their wake, the Egyptians saw their gods as powerless and impotent, leading to the ultimate liberation of the Israelites from slavery. The plague served as a powerful reminder that there is only one true God, the Lord, who is sovereign over all creation. Opening, these plagues were not random acts of punishment, but were symbolic attacks on the false gods of Egypt. Each plague was a direct challenge to the power and authority of a specific Egyptian god. The first, the transformation of the Nile water into blood, was a strike against Hapi, the god of annual flooding, and Osiris, for whom the Nile was his bloodstream. This plague demonstrated the Lord's dominion over the elements and his power over life and death. The second plague, the infestation of frogs, targeted Hapi and Heqet, both associated with fertility. The Lord showed his control over fertility and reproduction, domains Heqet, the frog-headed goddess, was believed to govern. The third and fourth plagues, lice and flies, challenged the authority of Seb, the earth god, Hathor, the goddess of protection, and Vachit, the fly god. The Lord's power over the earth and all its creatures was unequivocally demonstrated. The fifth plague, the death of livestock, was a direct affront to Apis, the bull god. This plague showed the Lord's supremacy over all living creatures. The sixth plague, boils on the body, challenged Sekhmet, goddess of epidemics, underlining the Lord's control over health and disease. The seventh and eighth plagues, hail and fire and locusts respectively, were aimed at Nut, the sky goddess, Seth, god of storms, Shu, god of the atmosphere, Siris, god of crops, and Serapia, protector of crops. These plagues demonstrated the Lord's dominion over the weather and the harvest. The ninth plague, darkness, targeted Ra, the sun god, the most worshipped deity in Egypt. This showed the Lord's power over light and darkness. The final plague, the death of the firstborn, signified the Lord's supreme authority over life and death, challenging Heqet, goddess of birth, and Min, god of reproduction. Closing, through these plagues the Lord proved his omnipotent power and supremacy over the false deities of Egypt. The final plague, the death of the firstborn, was the most devastating and resulted in the deliverance of the Israelites from slavery. This heartbreaking event was a turning point, leading to a wave of profound change across Egypt. Pharaoh, once a figure of unyielding authority, was brought to his knees, begging Moses and the Israelites to leave Egypt. The once mighty civilization was left in a state of disarray and grief. The Israelites, who had endured years of hardship and servitude, were finally free. They embarked on a journey towards a promised land, leaving behind the chains of their past. This was not just a physical journey, but a spiritual one, a testament to their unwavering faith in the Lord. The plagues, in all their horror, were not acts of blind wrath, but divine interventions, each one meticulously targeted at the false gods of Egypt. In conclusion, the 10 plagues served as a resounding testament to the omnipotent power and supremacy of the Lord over the false deities of Egypt.